Good afternoon, all. Welcome to Disqualified Dads. I am in sunny Cardiff here with Sister Sally. Sister Sally Ann Burris is the founder of Split the Difference, who is taking the fight and the challenge to the CMS and addressing issues for men and boys. Sister Sally, just introduce yourself again, or want to say a bit about yourself?
Okay, so I've got a background in services, delivered for a really long time. The services are ranging from whole family, around family courts, children's services, any services that may be attached to the needs of a family who are struggling in the community. So it could be education, health, mental health, CAMS, pretty much broad spectrum. It was attached to supporting people. From that, I ended up doing a lot of research around domestic abuse. Um, I won a Police and Crime Commissioner funding, but it was £500,000 funding to create a whole family domestic abuse service. That led on to me doing some research, particularly around men and boys' needs. And then from those needs, I realised that actually boys and men don't have the same focus, they don't have the same lens shown on them. From that, it was 6 years research that was national and international. So lots of countries, and Split the Difference was born from that.
Right, okay, Sister Sally, the main thing I want to try and talk about now, where you've ended up with Split the Difference, and obviously you're dealing with the men and boys, and I know recently the stuff you've done in Ireland, a little bit I know about it, and the case that you took to the APPG and the CMS. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that, just so the
Okay.
average person out there knows what we're about or what you're about
Okay.
effectively, and that element of that success you had with that APPG, yeah.
Okay. So
And even from my understanding, because I'm still trying to understand some
that's
of this stuff,
okay.
yeah.
So when I took this on, there is the main area that has prevented men and boys from having equality in services and their surrounding families. So 85% of our work is for men and boys, 15% for women. If I had a woman come in and asking me for help, we would give them the same help. It's just that 85% I save to support men and boys because they haven't got the same support out there. So when I started Split the Difference, there are significant areas that impact on every area of life. Domestic abuse, the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, and the Istanbul Convention, how that comes down into each country was a significant thing that locked men out of many services and made services discriminate against them. So when Split came about, there's 13 focus areas. I had to try and make it as small, but for me, we looked at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So Maslow's a great theorist in terms of he believed that, people have to have certain things in their life before they can progress to the next thing and the next thing. And the most fundamental is food and shelter.
Yes.
Food, shelter, and then you move on to forming relationships. And until, as you develop as human beings, the more of a foundation you have where you're safe and healthy and warm, you can move on to things like, developing you as a human being and things. So there was 13 areas that we'd identified that were key areas. So there were things like family court, criminal court, children's services, health, education. There were key areas where men were struggling because they weren't having the same equality in services.
Okay, can I cut in there, Sally? Yeah, just for the layman out there, yeah, I just want to ask you, how did we get there where the same services are not available for men and boys? Was that an accident? This is what I don't understand. Did we accidentally slip into that area? Did it happen overnight? Or do you think it's happened systematically? That's the bit where I can't get my own head around it.
Okay, so I think the battle of the sexes, the battle of genders, has gone on for thousands and thousands of years.
Right.
I think it's a natural thing that exists between genders. In its nice celebratory form, it's flirting. There's this relationship between men and women that starts from childhood. Where we don't understand each other. For me, it's part of why we need to live. We need to understand each other. And I think in its nice form, it's flirting, competitiveness. You go out, you play darts together.
Yes.
There's a nice thing around that competition. In a negative context, you take that into political arena. What it's become is it's becoming a battle of the gender that actually it's a power struggle.
Yes.
And it's in politics. We human beings are very complex, and I think the relationships that we set up amongst ourselves is complex. women are driven, biologically driven to be certain things, and we have our brains work in a certain way, our physiology works in a certain way, men the same. And I think that when we build in those relationships, men are predispositioned to go out to work, to earn the income, to take care and protect their family. They're nurtured into this biologically.
It's a
It's a prime.
primal pre-programming that you don't even know it yourself, but that is,
It
yeah,
is,
I
and
can
then
relate to
we
that, yeah.
grow up. We grow up. Our families. You're a boy. I'm a girl. Boys do this. Girls do that, and you get a lot of social context on that. So our identity as a man or a woman it is set, and then we're asked to communicate together. So that's one thing. Um, Men are predispositioned to. They're not very vocal. Part of my job is saying to guys, look, I understand that you don't want to be out there in the world. You don't want to be talking about all your feelings and thoughts. You're very, you're quiet in that. You just want to do your job and you just want to get on with
That was me.
life.
You talking about me? You talking
Yeah,
about me? So
yeah.
that was me. Yeah, I'm that guy. Yeah.
This is guys. You just want to do what you're doing. You're happy as long as your family are happy and whatever. Generally, you're happy.
Yes.
And
Yeah. I
men are
can
like
go
this.
with that.
Women are more dynamic and they get involved. They get involved in emotional things. They get involved in, their female nurturing things. These relationships are quite key and core. What has happened is the battle of that sexes has got involved in politics. I went back 2,000 years in my research because there was a time in my research I wanted to understand this extreme feminist narrative. Were women ever suppressed? What does suppression look like? Because in all the women I know, as a non-Muslim before I converted to a Muslim now, all the women I know absolutely, mostly generally rule their home. They have a very
Yes.
strong voice in their family unit,
I can confirm, right, that in the South Asian community generally, though there's this cultural narrative that men are solid and they lead the house, and women are sort of led. Most mums generally run, in charge of the house. Well, yeah, I can generally most Asian households as a culture. So yeah, I can relate to that. Yeah.
And I mean, I speak to lots of people. African households will say, because this is part of my research. I looked at this, the intricacies, and I went back 2,000 years looking at women. Did women ever run businesses? 2,000 years ago, did they run businesses? Did they go into wars? Did they rule countries? Well, they did. They did. There's evidence of it everywhere. So but when you get into a political arena, what's happened now is in 2010, the UN women, if we fast forward this to the generation, we can talk about the 1920s and women couldn't vote. Well, neither could men. Unless you owned land, men couldn't vote either.
Right.
So what you see in society and what, extreme feminists, for example, what they will push forward is we couldn't vote in the 1920s. Well, neither could guys. If you wasn't a landowner, right, neither could men vote. It was only the hierarchy that were allowed to vote,
Mm-hmm.
So the narrative that we've been nurtured into believing wasn't true. It's not built on a foundation of truth. You fast forward to 2010 and the United Nations formed the UN Women. And in 2011, they formed the Istanbul Convention. Right. Now, the UN Women is a globally networked, I happen to think it's an amazing thing to have a globally networked, multicultural, multifaceted organisation that looks at what do women and girls need. Brilliant idea. But what it didn't do was give the man and the boy the same thing, right? It didn't give men, so it silenced men. So the UN Women as an organisation is now integrated into every global narrative arena that you can think of. Politics, legislation, business, education, health,
Yes, it's woven
sustainability,
into society
everything.
completely. Yeah.
And they've got a voice in every single arena, right? So in the UN they've got a voice, and in their own countries they've got a voice. And it is networked across it. If you think of like legislation and guidance and policy and how fiscal management, women and girls have a narrative within that. So they're consulted with, they're part of the decision making, and they're very well networked. That happened in 2010. In 2011, the Istanbul Convention was formed and put out into the world. The Istanbul Convention is a protection of women and girls against violence.
Right.
Okay? Now, again, I'm not knocking this. I think it's a brilliant idea, to understand on a global scale to understand what the issues are that women experience in domestic abuse and violence, and how globally there can be a narrative that says we need to not do that, and these are best practice, these are standards, these brilliant, but they didn't give a man and boy the same thing.
Okay, before you carry on, let me cut you in there, yeah? So, everything you've explained on your research about 2,000 years, the situation, like I said, both men didn't have the right to vote either unless they own land. Why are these, so if you look generally in the media and what's being pushed with this agenda, and like I said, I'm all for women having rights and these conventions and all of that, I'm all for that. Why is no one talking about this? Why is this part of the history and the facts not put out there as openly? Is it just convenient to then put these other elements out?
I think what you've got is, you've got, wherever governance sits, power and money sits.
Oh, okay.
Right, so wherever decision making is made, normally, for me, what I've recognised is you've got the community, and men and women just want to live their lives, and they want to thrive, and we all have our dreams. We dream of finding the perfect man, the perfect woman, having family, going on holidays, having the car, just having a happy, easy existence. It's what we dream of. So communities, this is the driver in communities and families. As you get up that ladder, it becomes more power driven, more governance focused, more money focused, and it's the people who want to be decision makers.
Right.
And the more you go up that layer, the more there becomes a very strong
agenda.
It's a power fight.
The agenda changes effectively.
Completely. It's about what can I get from this, and I have seen people move into this world with the greatest of intentions, heartfelt intentions. And somewhere along the line, their voice and that intention becomes weaker and weaker and weaker, and they start to play the game of chess. Mm-hmm. The game of chess takes over, and I understand it. You're in a global narrative where everybody's moving these pieces, and you've got to somehow fit into that to get your voice, or the voice of the people that you support, to be heard. But unfortunately, it becomes a very corrupt and a very negative environment.
Okay, so you've triggered me in a certain thought now, yeah, because what you said now, yeah. So most people, like you said, they want to find a good, suitable partner, get married, settle down, own a house, go on holidays, 2 kids, little pet dog. They're happy. The common man and woman are happy with that, yeah. But with that agenda from above, with power, money, like you said, as it goes up, and this is for me, which I've lived, and I know many that are living this, where that primal instinct, as we discussed earlier, to want to be with your children. And this is what, when I look at the whole family court system, I believe it is a clever system for someone to have thought this out and done this. The ability to monetize the basic human rights of a parent and a child. And that now ties in nicely with your opening sort of statement, really, I must say.
Well, I mean, this is what happens. You've got, the whole male and female.
Sorry, just sort your mic out. Yeah, I don't want to miss this. There's so many gems out that you're putting out there. Yeah. I don't want the people to miss it.
That's okay.
That'll be all right. Yeah, that's it. Carry on.
Start again.
No, that's fine. I'm sure it's fine. Yeah. Carry on. So carry on from there. Yeah.
Okay, so you're right in that when governance comes in place, we all know now, it doesn't matter whether you're in the UK or in America or you're in Germany or whatever, services are now privatised to a larger extent. There is a global narrative that says we subcontract services. So whereas lots of countries used to manage their own services, those services are now subcontracted to NGOs, non-government organisations, charities, whatever.
Okay.
So in terms of managing the policies and legislations that are put in place, a lot of those things are put out to private businesses. Power, money, like I said to you, there's a layer. There's a certain layer. Once you get above that layer, what's in that layer is power, control, and money. That's a decision. Okay. That is it. In terms of the Istanbul Convention, because it's quite key, because there's no comparative convention for boys and men, and there's no comparative organisation. We've got the UN Women, we've got no UN Men. There's no voices that brings an equal kind of agenda balance to the table. Yeah. There's no balance. So when the Istanbul Convention, because it's about protecting women and girls, and again I'll say rightly so, we do need to protect human beings,
Agreed, yes.
right? In a family setting globally. But because that was then asked, the UN then said, right, countries need to ratify, which means countries have to start to build into their policies and their legislation and to fund things that would make women and girls safe, right? So they have to address things, a responsibility for it.
Okay, so just to cut you on that specific point, because you've triggered another thought in me.
That's okay.
Sorry to keep cutting you.
No.
So 2010, when the Istanbul Convention made this organization for women and girls to protect women and girls, was that because of the original primal ideology that men need to protect their families, their women, their daughters? Is it just derived from that? Because what for a simple person like me to say, okay, when they did that, yeah, there's someone not in the room say, great idea, we should have one to protect men and boys, or did men and boys just not need protecting at the time when that convention was being drawn out?
Okay, so this is built on women being victims.
So that's exactly, so when I get into, so that narrative of a word women, where there are a lot of reported cases of female victims globally by men specifically at the time.
Yeah.
Was that the case?
Yeah, look at this in a different way, right? Just to help you, for us to kind of chat about it. Human beings, our brains are designed to respond to things in a certain way. The first thing is risk, right? When a child walks down the stairs and it falls down the stairs, it learns to walk in a certain way.
Yes.
The primal aim for your brain is to protect the body that contains your soul, your spirit, and your heart.
Keep you alive.
You keep you alive. Now, so risk, everybody thinks your memory is to remember all the sweet things, right? When I was a child, it's not. Your memory is designed, psychologists will say, your memory is designed to keep your body safe.
Yes.
You fall down the stairs, your memory's sitting right. So
don't do that again, yeah.
Don't do it again. We're predispositioned to work from risk first. Okay. Now, women are very powerful, right? They're very powerful, emotionally kind of driven, mentally driven. The capacity for their hearts is massive, but they also know their vulnerabilities. If you take this zone in a position of power, when we want change, right? The whole world is, where's the risk?
Right. Okay.
Where's the risk, right?
Yes.
The violence against women and girls in terms of the Istanbul Convention was designed to minimise the risk to women and girls. When you have something like that, it is looking at women as they're victims.
Right.
To have victims, we have to have a perpetrator.
I see.
So without giving equal representation, right, the strongest thing that convention can do, because that convention has gone into every single risk management policy in every single piece of legislation. So it has influenced education, health, mental health, HR policy. It's influenced housing, transportation.
Society, the whole is woven into, like you
Boots, the
said,
chemist, banks.
society.
It has influenced every risk management system in every single part of our lives. Okay. Now, the biggest thing one of the things that I and many women like me find really annoying is extreme feminist narrative has created women to be victims. So some women who want power, money and control, they are saying, but these women are victims. I have to protect these women because they're victims of themselves. Justification. So the Istanbul Convention has created women as victims without giving men the same thing. There's no parity in that. When it goes into these services, risk management, so the TV, the news, everything, it's all about, we've got to protect women because they're victims. So it's influenced all of the services. So there's a lot of money generated from that. There are literally worldwide billions and billions and billions and billions spent on the protection of women and girls. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that, but where there's victims, you have to have the perpetrator. Society cannot look at men as victims. It's not allowing them to be victims. So men are battling. They're constantly battling. You're not allowed to feel. You're not allowed to say I'm being abused. You're not allowed to say I'm struggling. they all say, you get this
Yeah, it's
narrative.
that society has placed that conditioning on you to just suck it up and carry on
And all the
effectively.
services wrap around
Are
that.
built up around it.
Deny.
And the family court machine, as I like to put it, is built up around exactly the narrative you've explained in great detail and depth. I have to say, it was quite a in-depth understanding
It's
of it.
just
Yeah,
observations of how this is playing out in society. I mean, one of the things that you notice, because this is impacted on business, because they say women need equality. Well, my research shows that women are the ones that have what they need. It's men that don't have equality in
yeah,
that. So in a corporate setting, I'm educated, all right? So I've got quite a few qualifications and I've got a lot of experience. I worked hard all my life. For 15 and a half I left school and I've not stopped working since. When you have women who, because they're saying we need women in the boardroom, and then they're looking for this 50, we've got companies, organisations that are pushing to get 50-50 in the boardroom.
right.
Naturally, we have men and women who are naturally drawn to different careers. If I ended up in a boardroom, I've been in a boardroom, I would want to go in that boardroom from my work, my education.
Yes.
I don't want to go in just because I'm a woman.
Tick box, yeah.
I'm a victim. So being turned into a victim of my gender is very insulting to me. It's extremely insulting to me because I work. So this one convention it's like a powerhouse. It's like an atom powerhouse, atom bomb powerhouse of energy that literally is pushing women into victimhood, but also pushing women who want power, control, and finance and all of that. It's elevating them purely because of their gender.
Okay, can I ask you a question before I forget? If I cut in, I apologise because otherwise I forget quick. Yeah, I'm a man. I forget things quickly.
No.
Right.
Men actually concentrate on the minute detail. It's not that you do that. Did you know this? Your brain is different. Sorry.
No, it's all right. Okay.
Detract. Yeah, go on.
See now, because I've forgotten that. I forgot my question.
That's
No.
okay. We can do a cut
Right.
there.
Okay. So we talk about equality, like you said. So they want the equality about in the workplace and women's rights. And like I said, I am all for that. We should have that. Not a problem. Yeah. But knowing what I know now and what I've been through in my own experience through the family court machine and the system and how the associated departments and services operate around all of this, yeah, there's an element of, I feel, instead of giving women the rights and the equality, there's an element of they just remove them away from men. To say, there you go. Do you see what I'm saying? So instead of actually giving rights, I think they just take any sort of rights away from men effectively. And once you've been through the family court system and you've been churned out of that machine, you realise that in this country, legitimately, you have less rights than a dog as a man. That is the harsh reality. Yeah.
This is the obvious truth.
So, is it the fact that women don't actually have any rights, so they've not given them anything, but they just gave them the power to exercise this victimhood effectively and removed any protection from men effectively to make it look like this illusion of equality and power?
Well, there is no inequality. The narrative that women are talking about, there
Exactly.
is no inequality. They say we want equality, this equality. Every part of that narrative is being debunked. It's been debunked. In the National Health Service, there are more female managers in the National Health Service than there are men. I could keep ruling the stats off, and I can give you these if you want to put them on your
Crack on.
narrative.
Put it out there. That's it.
We've got, if you're 30% of boys are failing in school, 25% are more likely to drop out with further education than girls. You've got National Health Service, the largest upper management and staff are women, teaching the same. If you look at things like the Victims Commissioner, the Mental Health Commissioner, the Children's Commission, all of these are female, right? So if you look at influence in decision-making roles in governance, they are women. So they will say, STEM subjects, they'll throw these things. Your question, I know, was more about, where does equality sit and all of that. What I'm trying to say to you is, every narrative that you see coming out through the media, women need equality, when you look at the stats and evidence,
it points otherwise.
It is men who do not have the equality in that setting. That's just the way it is. What happens is they throw these stats out. They're not looking. I'll give you an example. Domestic abuse. When a woman walks into a police station and she says, I'm being abused, okay, she potentially connects to 7 services, right?
Yes, yes.
So she will have criminal court, family court, the family court process will start, children's services, women's aid, victim
Yes.
support. She may have MAPA or MARIC, the protective elements to that involved. She potentially could become multiple counts in statistics, right? When a man walks in and says the same thing, first of all, he has to prove he's a victim.
He won't be taken seriously.
He
With the police, he won't take you seriously.
He has to prove he's a victim. I've got guys, too many on my books, who have literally had the police called. They're the ones covered in blood and they're the ones who get arrested. Men have to prove they're victims. Men will possibly become 2 counts. They'll become the victim support phone call, right? Because if you report a crime, you're a police count, a domestic abuse crime, and a victim support phone call, because there's only a certain amount of organisations that feed into the Office of National Statistics. The system that counts whether 2/3 of the population are women who experience domestic abuse and 1/3 of men, the system that gathers those statistics is not the same.
Right.
So we did a poll with some. This was about 2.5, 3 years ago now. We did a poll. I actually contacted police stations and spoke to frontline police officers, and I said to police officers, what do you believe, based on your daily activity going out to houses where domestic abuse has been reported, given your weeklies, what do you believe is the percentage, given your weekly work patterns? And they said 50-50. In fact, one police station in England told me they believed it was 75% of their call-outs were where the male were victim and 25% were women. Now, this is a verbal. Now, I don't know whether you know this, but when a police officer, if a neighbour calls because there's a disturbance in the house and a police officer goes for a domestic call-out, when they knock that door, if all is quiet and nothing's going on and both partners say we don't understand, everything's okay, we had an argument, the TV's too loud or whatever, we're all fine. Even though there's nothing that comes out of that call out, when the police leave that property, they have to identify who is the potential perpetrator and who is the potential victim. And they may know nothing.
Right.
So they go back to the station, they have to write their report, and on their report they have to make an assumption of that is counted. That influences how that police department goes to the next call out. So there's no truth behind these stats. There's no truth behind this evidence because they're not correlated in the same way. So when we talk about equality and we ask about, so what does that mean? What does it look like? Where women are concerned, they have the equality. There's just no comparable research, no comparable way of gathering stats that can show what the true picture is.
Yes, and this is all effectively driven from, like you said, the Istanbul Convention and globally modern day sort of agenda that is now being pushed, and it is now effectively woven in every part of society.
Every single.
Bloody hell, it's worse. It's worse than I thought. It's quite depressing.
I mean, my research I did 12 months research. I'm repeating probably what you see on a few other interviews, but I did 12 months research, 21 acts of law in the UK. So I read the acts of law, read the guidance, read the policies in organisations coming from that. And then I looked at the fiscal management of the UK and I compared things like the family court, children's services and housing. Those legislations are not compatible. They don't work. For example, if a dad goes if children's services are involved in a dad's case, a mum and dad's case, and the court is involved in that case, housing often is a contributing factor. So if you've got family going through court, children's services is saying dad wants 50-50 care, children's services is saying he's not got a suitable home for 50-50 care. Home, if you're a low-income dad, the housing legislation doesn't have to find you a property, because if the children have got a home with one parent, it's a stable environment, the family court and children's services will assess the dad's needs based on his accommodation, whether he can sustain having his children there. So they're not compatible.
Yes, I know.
They don't work together. So I looked at that. Then I mirrored that in over 15 countries. I ended up because you can see a common narrative. When you start reading all these legislations, you can see there's a common themes, there's common words going on, there's common drives, common risk management tools. And I ended up I followed the the narrative, and it led me back to the UN. And then I found the UN, this Istanbul Convention. Never heard of it before.
Yeah,
I'd never
so
heard of
this
it.
all comes from there. No, listen, I've learned a lot just in this opening statement. My eyes really opened even more. So going back to that, I just want to confirm something, because you might know. I was told this by a father who was going through the system, again, allegations of abuse and whatnot. He said, in this country now, if you have been labelled with false allegations, and I don't know if it's the criminal court or the family court that they find you guilty of that act, yeah, your name will go down on every council up and down the country, and you will not be given housing if you are deemed to be a domestic abuser. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there's records that are kept. One of the things that I say to dads, that child protection is a global, and domestic abuse. Anybody that's been through allegations, whether they're false or real, around domestic abuse, and I have my own take on domestic abuse. We know, for example, that I think the last time I looked at these stats was about 2 years ago. They might have slightly changed, but it was something like 73% of domestic abuse is bidirectional, which means the abuse comes from both sides.
Both sides, right.
Which is how my journey all started. So when you experience an allegation of domestic abuse, or whether it's in place, the first reaction to that is the police, that their risk management system say they have to bring in children's services, because ultimately the child is protected. Once children's services become involved in something like that, or family court becomes involved in something like that, however, how that process runs out determines about whether it's easy for children's services in Wales to contact children's services in England and find out whether there's a history.
Okay.
So and once you're in that system, it does affect your housing. It doesn't, there's more filters being put in place now to prevent dads getting a stable home,
Being
stable
homeless,
environment.
basically,
Yeah.
or sleeping out their van.
I mean, the last time I looked at the stats, 87% of homelessness was men or boys at the age of 16. So I mean, yes, it does impact. I mean,
that's pretty horrific. Look, I have to say, it is depressing. As much as I like talking about it, is depressing, man, to hear that.
Well, I mean, I spend all my time saying to people, everything I do based on truth and evidence. I never say anything that I can't evidence, right? And when I coach dads, or we work with dads, my thing to them is, I say, right, you have to stop. And I know when dads get in this situation, they're in a place of desperation. I mean, when you had your children, within 2 weeks of your child being born, your whole biology changed. All right, your testosterone levels dropped. All right, you will never regain them from your first child.
Really?
They will never go up again.
Oh, bloody hell.
They drop. that biological response changes the mechanisms in your brain. It changes the biology in your brain, and it changes you for a good reason, to be a dad.
Oh, I
right?
see.
So when women say, "Oh, I carried my child and it's changed my body," and I'm like, "Yeah, I've had 4. I know." So
just to say, as a man, it'll just soften you up so you can be a little bit more maternal.
Well,
right?
It does things like, there's some amazing studies that have been done. There's somebody in Oxford that's done a brilliant study. The American studies are really incredible. Because they did them for a long period of time, and they really went in depth to these psychological studies around the biological differences and the parenting differences, response mechanisms to children. Those changes that happen in a man or a woman are designed for you to become focused on that child's needs.
Okay.
And it's not just an emotional change, it is a physical change. So, for example, in a woman and a man, there's 2 areas of the brain that change. They're different areas, they change for different reasons. But your neural pathways, your response mechanisms, they all change.
Okay.
So in the American study, which was, I really loved reading this stuff, they did things like, because I just get fed by it, but they did things like, they would sit dads and mums in a room, and they would record their babies crying, and they quickly found that within 2 weeks, mum and dad could identify their baby's cry out of 20 children.
Oh, wow.
So it was so what your change has done for you was, it hones you into being a dad to your child. The interesting thing for me was, when women carry children, they obviously, their bodies completely change to feed that child and nurture it. Dad is going through the same thing. His testosterone levels drop, his neural pathways are changing, his baby's born, within 2 weeks he can recognise the needs of his child exactly the same as a woman. Women don't know this stuff. We, through society and our parenting, we're conditioned to have it all on our shoulders, emotionally. Oh, you're the nurturer, you know? Well, actually, these tests show that men are just as equipped, just as able to look after their child's needs as women are. There are subtle differences, right? I read this stuff and I looked at this and I thought, I remember at the time thinking, God, I wish I'd known that as a young mum, because if I'd known that, I wouldn't have had to worry that my husband wasn't looking at these things. For you, what this testing showed was there was 2 areas in the brain. In a woman, one area changes, in a man, a different area. The only difference between a man and a woman on the American study was the area that changes for a man is where their fight, flight or freeze is. So a man ended up having a heightened level of protection.
Right, yeah.
So his protection level just heightened. The interesting thing for me was the man didn't have to be the biological father, because they also did this with adoptive fathers and with foster fathers, and the same response. So what seems to be happening is, as soon as a man decides he's going to parent, his body changes to be able to do that, you know, which was really interesting. Men need to know this stuff, you know, they need to understand, but so does all these services.
Yeah, see, you made me think of something. See, that is very interesting, yeah. So, you know, like you said, society, we're conditioned, and me being from the South Asian sort of community as well, mum's taking care of newly born, dad's just clumsy and in the way, go off and do some overtime or do some work, whatever, yeah. You sort of accept that conditioning because you know no different. And with a South Asian family, as extended sisters, aunties,
I know they all
jump
they
in,
all come in and
and you effectively are a passenger. And most men may be sometimes happy to just go with it. Now the thing is this, right? And with what you said about the natural drop in testosterone and men become more protective of a child. Now, this is where, if you look at modern society, as you said, the conditioning, modern relationships, where we are now, other people's lived experiences, where when they're with a partner who has full control of the child, so the mother generally, because of this, especially in my community, they are the primary carer for the child, the nurturer. You're effectively a passenger. And in relationships, the way the law stands, as we've just explained in great detail, how it's come about, as a man in the relationship, if the relationship ain't great, effectively you're already a passenger, the main carer of the child, bringing to certain factors like we discussed earlier about personality disorders and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, you are effectively, like I said, you want to protect that child. The person that is the main carer, you're not getting along with, or they've demonstrated certain behaviors that you're not comfortable with, but you have to effectively toe the line, as I say it, because they've got the child. Do you see what I'm saying? So that I can relate to that like really well due to my own experiences. But that's quite an insight, I have to say. I didn't expect that's quite an insight.
I mean, when I say this to dads, because dads don't realise, because society have fixed mum and dad in particular roles, and dads do work. I mean, I speak to dads who go out at 5 o'clock in the morning. They work in, oh gosh, all weathers, you know, digging and building. And I don't know whether you know this, 97% of our world is kept going by men. If men did down their tools tomorrow, we'd have no planes, no trains, no automobiles. We'd be building no schools, no houses. Our world would not move.
I was trying to put out there. I was trying to put out there before. I was that guy. I have down my tools as well. Yeah, I have down tools.
So you do this. There's a respect in that. We bring to the table what we bring to the table. So for a woman, I mean, I've worked all my life, but one of my cravings was to be a stay-at-home mum. I used to fantasize about cooking and cleaning and being present in my children's life and looking after my house. I fantasized about that. That's not my. But society fits us into roles, right? But what it doesn't realize that when it does that, it doesn't do that based on reality, because men can, you will be in tune with your child. You will notice when your child is not moving to its natural rhythm, or something's wrong with it. You may not acknowledge that because society may have said to you that that's her job.
Yeah.
But But the simple fact is that what this psychology and science is amazing now. We can see what happens in the brain biologically, physically. We can see what happens with certain response systems.
Yeah.
We know now, And when I say this to dads, I physically see dads when they know that their body changes and they know that they are being created to be that dad. I watch them, like their body languages, and I say, "Did you know this?" I see them. I remember talking to a stepdad in a park. I get all the wacky questions because I'm a revert Muslim. This woman came up to me in the local park. I was with the children and I was playing, and she said to me, "Can I ask you a question?" She said, "You're Muslim. Are you suppressed or oppressed?" Which made me laugh. But so I told her all about, women are women, whatever they are. Um, but she had a partner with her, and I assumed the partner was the father of the child. And he wasn't, he was a stepdad. And I was telling her all these things about men and women and celebrating. So I was telling her about Islam, men's rights, women's rights, children's rights, and the joy of that. And if you're practicing, it's a really nice place to be. And I turned to him and I said, dads have a really important place in Islam, and like you do with your child. And then he said, "It's not my child." And I'm a stepdad. And he was looking really down. And I said to him, "Did you know that it doesn't matter if you're a stepdad, this would have happened to you, because you didn't have any other children?" And I saw this guy go from slouched shoulders to sitting up and his wife turned to him and she said, "I told you. You were significant in his life."
See. Yeah.
I think people don't know how much it matters. I mean, there's a lady in doing research. She's an anthropological psychologist, and she's done 10 years research on this. But she focuses on dad's activity. Now, rough play is a significant part in a child's life. Dads bring rough play. When kids will fall down, dads will say, "Right, come on, second, deep breath, get up, come on, come on, come on." That single thing, right? That single thing is the thing that gives children resilience.
Yes.
So whenever life knocks them,
yes,
it's that programming, that rough play, that throwing them about.
Roughhousing,
Because what it brings to children, it brings courage, it brings adventure, it makes them take risks, it makes them know that what's in front of them, they can push for. And if they get hurt, you're not going to damage yourself, but take a deep breath, right? You've got to get back up. Now, we know in prisons, last time I looked at the stats, but we know that things like in prisons, I think it was something like 73% of people in prison come from single parent families.
yes,
A lot of drug users, people who self-medicate, they're from single parent families. There's no robustness,
Yeah.
As soon as something comes towards people who come from single parent,
adversity.
the coping mechanisms are not there. There's lots around, Generation X and whatever. The resilience is not there in children, and that's what dads bring. Dads bring resilience.
No, see, I've heard that about the single parent homes, single mother homes, 70% prison, but I never understood that link between what you just said. You've obviously gone into a lot more depth.
Dads are really important. I mean, they're super important in children's lives, and the ignorance is, I don't think women know that. I don't think there's enough knowledge or education around what happens to men. I mean, if you were to strip women away from their children, we would think it was torture. We do. We're alienation situated.
It's torture for men as well.
It's the same.
It's exactly the same.
It's exactly the same. And I don't think women know the biological changes.
Yeah, but see, everything you just said, right, about men, the changes, the need to bond, protect, all of that, that becomes even more true. Because if you look at how many men are fighting to see their kids effectively, when you've lost that contact, all of those people, anyone who's lost contact with their child, they know in their heart that feeling, that bereavement every single day. So there must be something going on inside for them to still feel that pain and loss.
I know.
On that note, Sister Sally, can we take a quick break? We'll start recording in a moment again, yeah?
Okay, cool. Sorry.